To make some sense of this. Michelle, we've been talking for weeks about the line between trade and diplomacy here. What does this mean?
Yeah, so the president has made it very clear that he sees the situation with trade with China and North Korea and their denuclearization as very, very linked in his mind. He made that clear in that 35-minute impromptu news conference he did the other day with the president of South Korea. But to echo David's point earlier, I just spoke with a source at the White House who tells me, indeed, those statements that David was referring to is exactly what has engendered this letter from the president to call this meeting off. I am not convinced this is the end of it. This could be part of the negotiation to try to get them back on board and to behave in a different way and try to effect change in their manner at this point. So let's see. But certainly they are quite upset about those comments that have been made in the last 24 hours by that North Korean diplomat.
We'll have to, I mean, it's very hard to know what happens here. He's called him all kinds of names,
right.
And then showered him with praise, and now this.
Well, he went, and remember, he started out with calling the guy Rocket Man. I mean, that wasn't necessarily something that you think that anybody could come back from. So I'm with Michelle. Those who want to dump the stock market on this, knock yourself out.
I mean, by the way, the back and forth when it was at its most heated did not necessarily have a particularly large impact on the stock market.
No.
And so it's unclear. But you don't, I mean, this could go back towards the nadir again, right? You don't know what the response is going to be,
as opposed
how
to
measured it's going to be, as opposed to what has been.
As opposed to the apogee where we were.
Yes.
We went from apogee to nadir in about 48 hours.
It wasn't quite the zenith, but we hoped there was more to come.
Yeah, exactly.
With denuclearization. John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, who's now the Secretary of State, when he was running CIA, went over there a couple of times and met with Kim Jong-un.
He made everybody look bad. North Korea made everybody look bad. The president's sensitive.
It was a bit of an evolutionary.
He did jump. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you remember the original reaction from the stock market when the president first had those fire and fury comments was quite negative. And then over time, they almost became inured to the back and forth that has happened between the two individuals.
Well, and let's remember, they canceled summits in 2004, Michelle.
Right.
They canceled summits in 2012. So even as this was being planned, people were remembering their penchant for setting up things that they would later take down.
Yes, absolutely. And ultimately, the core issue was the U.S. has always made clear this was never going to happen unless Kim Jong-un was willing to talk about denuclearization by the way we define it, not the way he defines it. Right. And there was intense skepticism that ultimately, when push came to shove, he was ever going to do that. And if you're going to try to get that from him in advance, it was going to be extremely difficult. Once again, though, this may be part of a negotiating tactic or ploy to see if they can get him back on board with that kind of agreement.
Right, especially since it's been 3 hours since he was on Fox this morning and said he might be willing to look at things like a phase-in of denuclearization. That was 3 hours ago, right? And now this letter.
Things happen a little fast. And Michelle, you still with us?
Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle, the trajectory of these talks, the best part was with South Korea. What do you think South Korea says and does here? They were really the winner in this.
South Korea is going to do everything possible to try and make this happen. The one thing I would say about South Korea is remember that their interests and our interests are not necessarily aligned. What President Moon's primary concern is peace on the Korean Peninsula. Those who are familiar with what's going on have suggested that denuclearization was actually lower among his priorities compared to a guarantee of peace on the peninsula where he lives and where over the country that he governs. That is very different than our primary objective, which is denuclearization of North Korea. So remember, the two countries look at this situation slightly differently, but it's a pretty big gap when you're talking about what you want the ultimate goal to be.
Yeah, indeed. For Moon, it has been the notion of reunification one day has been a big reason he's built up the political capital he has.
Yes, I mean, a lot of people just kind of felt that one day it would be like East Germany and West Germany, which was a miracle. We never thought it would happen, and that was President Reagan. But President Trump's pulling back from that right now.
Korean ETF, by the way, down almost 2%.
It's a bad day for South Korea between
Yes.
South Korean cars and now this existential crisis. Real bad day.
But Northrop up 1%, right?
Oh, they're flying. Just to that
Raytheon up
stupid
1%.
downgrade the other. Excuse me, I didn't mean that. It was an ill-advised downgrade.
I would also highlight, guys, that this is also at a time when North Korea has invited international journalists, one North American journalist, to come see the dismantling of their nuclear testing area.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have seen that in a very hollow light, saying, you know what? The place had already collapsed. Generally, it wasn't really usable, so it's a hollow gesture at this point. And by the way, if they've already succeeded in their nuclear ambitions of having an intercontinental ballistic missile that can launch a nuclear warhead, then they don't need it much anymore, right? They've already arrived.
As a reminder, President did take questions from reporters earlier in the week in which he said there was a substantial chance this would not work out. Take a quick listen to that.
There's a chance that it'll work out. There's a very substantial chance that it won't work out. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th. But there's a good chance that we'll have the meeting.
He also went on in those comments to talk as well about the benefits that would come to the North Korean economy.
Sure.
And, referencing the fact to the points you're just making that it would be similar. He didn't say this, but he did sort of imply.
East Germany.
Right.
We watched that live on Power Lunch that day. It was extraordinary to watch. I mean, he said Kim Jong-un will be very happy, he will be very safe, and he will be very rich if he does a deal, right? I mean, he made very, very clear what the U.S. was willing to offer in exchange for denuclearization. What was also interesting about that news conference was it made clear what the hierarchy of desires was for the president, right? When he said China and the border, every time I think about China trade, I think about what can they do for us on the border with North Korea. So he clearly prioritizes trying to get a deal with North Korea over all the issues that we talk about a lot on CNBC related to trade.